And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Adsetts CIB, banking on local growth with Club Med South Africa to bring the first resort of its kind to the country. Good evening. Happy Heritage Day to you. Welcome to The Money Show. I'm Stephen Grootes. I've been fascinated to watch some of the news channel coverage of Heritage Day around the country and what people are doing. And there's certain things that feature. Listening to on 702, listening to John Perlman, music was a big feature. For a lot of other people, though, a big feature was food. I mean, the different types of food. And of course, I think you'd have to really look far for a place that provides a better, I'm going to have to use the phrase, melting pot of different foods than South Africa. I mean, you really, if you're looking for a kind of fusion of foods rather than the sort of fruit salad of the United States, you really want to come to Nzansi. And of course, I mean, inevitably, someone decided to have a mass braai. Where did they decide to have it? Oh, Loftus. Where else would you have a mass braai? 2,500 people they had there. So just interesting to see the economic activity around Heritage Day, and the Deputy President, Paul Mashatile, sort of standing in President Cyril Ramaphosa's shoes, he says mischievously, while President Ramaphosa is at the UN General Assembly talking about heritage today as well, and suggesting heritage could in fact bring people together. I thought that was quite an interesting comment. There was a very interesting story on MoneyWeb today about Virgin Active. And Virgin Active are talking about what they call a philosophy of a third space. And what they're trying to do is go from just being a gym, so you would only go there to gym and maybe to get something to eat, to actually making it more of a work space. And I was thinking about that and wondering, actually, this might be on the money. I've, over the last sort of year or so, spent a bit more time working at home than I did in the past. I should probably rephrase that. Trying to work at home than I did in the past. I find it incredibly difficult, and it's not just because I have children and dogs and cats and other people coming through the house and deliveries and this and that. There's just distractions. There's always something else to do. I could go and clean my cupboard or something. Whereas when I'm in a workspace, I actually find I'm much more productive. So my question to you is not the sort of usual, where do you prefer working from? It's where are you most productive? I know some people who have a specific corner in a specific coffee shop, and they'll go there, they put their headphones on, and they'll be productive there. But if they go somewhere else, they're not as productive. I know some people who go and find a small room in an office room. They don't even have to be there, by the way. Maybe it's not their hours, or they only work their half day, and they spend the rest of the day there. They lock themselves in. I know someone who actually, I won't tell you where and when this was, but actually would go into a soundproof radio studio. No one knew he was there. He would almost lock the door, and he got so much done. So where are you most productive? Would really like to hear your story on that tonight, please, on 011 883 0702 and 021 446 0567. We'll speak to Izak Odendaal, the investment strategist at Old Mutual, in a moment about what's happening with the U.S. interest rates there, the Federal Reserve, the sort of sustained political campaign, really, by President Donald Trump to try and sort of force that bank to drop interest rates. FedHasa, their national chair, Brett Tunge, he'll be on your radio in a little while. Big changes coming to the visa process from the Home Affairs Minister. I think that'll make a change. We'll talk also after 6:30 about the two-pot retirement system and how it compares to other systems. And I remember when we brought the two-pot retirement system in, many people make the point this hadn't really been tried somewhere else. It's something genuinely new in the pension space. So I think there's an interesting conversation there. And I was surprised to see, I don't tend to spend a lot of time looking at export regulators from Taiwan, but their Trade Department has said that we are no longer allowed to import in bulk a certain class of microchips without prior approval. They said for national security concerns. Now, let me help you out here. You don't have to get a map to see how far away we are from Taiwan. I'll give you a hint. It's halfway around the world. So I don't think national security concerns are the issue. It is surely because we took the decision to say to them, you have to move your sort of international office in South Africa from Pretoria, Tshwane, to Joburg, basically downgrading it. And this is that response. We'll speak to Jan Vermeulen about that. Lots to come on The Money Show tonight. Your voice notes, please, on 072 702 1702. Where are you most productive when you need to work? 11 after 6.
The Money Show.
with Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
And DSTV channel 856.
Well, a statement from the Road Accident Fund Board today. We haven't had many statements from them. And of course, the CEO, Collins Letswalo, was suspended. I think his term eventually lapsed. They said they won't appoint him for another term. So they basically don't have a formal CEO at the moment. And they've made the point that they have resumed payments to to victims of accidents who have been claiming money from them. And this has been a huge issue for quite a long time. They say they've already paid out 3.3 billion rand. I was interested in this. They say they're going to pay out 4 billion rand a month, every month, until the end of the year. That's a ton of money. It's a huge amount of money. But it's also a huge shift. Now, there's so much to sort out at the Road Accident Fund. The system, as we know, is pretty much broken. The way in which we fund it is just not working anymore and is not going to work. So that's just one part of the problem. The other part of the problem is their accounting has been a mess. And I say that when, I'm the closest thing or the most different thing to a chartered accountant I think I've ever met. And that's because they've been stuck in court with their interpretation of what the actual accounting standard should be. So there's a huge amount to sort out at the Road Accident Fund. But your experience, please, have you maybe received some money in the last little while? I mean, for some people, really, the Road Accident Fund has changed their lives after a very, very difficult and unfortunate incident. But it would be good to hear from you on that and the Road Accident Fund. 011-883-0702 and 021-446-0567.
702.
702.
Stephen is on X.
At Stephen Grootes.
13 after 6. Now, well, last night, the chair of the U.S. Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, saying he believes that inflation in the U.S. could still go up while employment could still go down. He said this situation was, the word he used was challenging. At the same time, despite big changes in the world, the U.S. Federal Reserve is, I'm sure, still the globe's most important central bank. Izak Odendaal is the investment strategist at Old Mutual. Izak, good evening, and thank you for the time on a public holiday. I really, really do appreciate it. Central banking in the US suddenly seems a lot more complicated because of what really must be interference by President Donald Trump. At this stage, do you think that interference, it's public interference, but I'm sure there's sort of unseen pressure as well, do you think that's having any impact on the decisions the bank is looking at making?
It's a very, very challenging environment, and it would have been challenging even without Trump's very direct and very persistent pressure. It's hard to know exactly how that pressure plays out in terms of the decision that the Fed has made, because I think they've made the decision by cutting rates last week that they probably would have made anyway. I think there's enough evidence of a slowdown in job creation in the U.S. to say that it's probably a right time to maybe reduce interest rates slightly, but of course Trump has been calling for a very aggressive reduction in interest rates. Yeah, so I mean it's challenging because on the one hand, if they try and be stubborn and try and assert their independence and say we're not going to cut rates just because the president is asking for it, that might invite further interference. And we've seen Trump has really kind of taken every single institution that he could under his control, whether it's the FBI or, the health department or whatever. So to say that he can't do the same with the Fed, I think is perhaps a bit naive. So it must factor into their thinking on some level. On the other hand, if they do take the political factors into consideration, then in a sense they are guilty themselves of not maintaining independence, because they're supposed to only look at economic factors and not play politics at all. So it really is a very difficult space for them.
So we've seen him he claimed to have fired Lisa Cook, who's one of the people on the board of the Federal Reserve, on the committee that makes the decisions. She's gone to court. So far she's won. One presumes that she'll continue to win. But Trump's influence on the Fed surely grows over time, right? Because over time, Jerome Powell will no longer be chair. I think it's early next year. He will basically be able to first sustain the pressure and second, make one or two appointments of his own, as in fact already has done.
Yeah, so he's already appointed one of his closest advisors, Stephen Moran, onto the board. There was a vacancy. And as you say, Jerome Powell's term in office will end by May next year. Now, again, it's a bit complicated because Powell will still be a board member, but his term as chairman expires. But I think the general expectation is that he will step down entirely, and that will be an opening for Trump. Then there is the further complication that about half the people on that interest rate decision-making board come from regional Federal Reserve banks. So they've got quite a decentralized system in the Fed, unlike the Reserve Bank in South Africa, where there's only one institution. Here we have 12 regional institutions, and there's a rotating membership of those regional institutions on the interest rate setting committee, the FOMC. So I think eventually Trump could also start influencing the process in how those regional presidents are appointed, but that's maybe a bit more of a convoluted process. But yes, absolutely. Ultimately, I think, as I said earlier, Trump has got his tentacles into all other institutions, and I think he will find a way to get into the Fed to get what he wants. So I think that does tell you that the bias on the Fed is definitely going to be towards lower interest rates for the duration of Trump's term. I'm not saying that Trump will get absolutely everything he wants. He's not going to get necessarily rates being cut by 200 basis points or 2 percentage points immediately. But I think definitely the bias will shift towards lower interest rates as he gets more and more of his people on that board and kind of manages to influence through other means.
Okay, so the risk then is that a bank will be cutting rates as a sort of result of something other than the economic decision that needs to be made. So rates then in the US would be lower than they would be otherwise. Is that a bad thing?
It's yes and no, right? So in the short term, obviously, everyone loves lower interest rates. I think the markets will be happy, consumers will be happy, et cetera, et cetera. But the reason we have independent central banks, the reason we give central banks this very unique ability to make decisions outside of political control is so that they can make decisions in the long-term interest of the country. And they can sometimes say it's time to do something that's painful and unpopular because we want to keep inflation under control, because if we don't, we're creating long-term problems for ourselves. And I think that's where the pawpaw eats the fan, is that ultimately, if inflation is too high or if it's threatening to run out of control, you want the central bank to be able to slam on the brakes, raise interest rates, cool things down, and get inflation back under control. So that is the risk. It's not sort of the immediate, next 1 or 2 or 3 years. It's if the institution loses the credibility that it has among the general public, history and experience across the world suggests then the fight against inflation becomes so much more difficult if the central bank has to basically win back its credibility among the general public. In other words, it tends to have to overreact so that people believe that it's serious and will believe that it's going to get inflation under control.
In fact, Izak, I'm no expert on this, but I think the pawpaw hit the fan, lovely metaphor, during the Nixon administration. Didn't he put pressure on the Federal Reserve to cut rates when they didn't want to, and it took the US a long time to recover from a sort of period of stagflation?
Correct. And ultimately, at the end of that period, that was the 70s, at the end of that period, by the early 1980s, interest rates had to go up in the US, I think, to around 15%. In order to finally get inflation under control. So by not dealing with the problem as it emerged in the early 70s, that inflation mindset becomes entrenched in society. Everyone just raises their prices, passes costs on to the next person, and that inflation mindset and that inflation behavior gets entrenched. And then ultimately dislodging it becomes more difficult, and you end up having to raise interest rates even more than you would have had to initially. So it really is a case of some short-term pain for longer-term gain, but I think we're now potentially moving in the opposite direction in the US, where it's going to have a bias towards short-term gain, perhaps longer-term pain.
How important is all of this to us? Yes, our central bank is not, and the governor is quite correct to sort of point out that we're not coupled to the US in any way, economically speaking. But it is still the most important economy in the world, and one presumes that there will be knock-on effects if the US central bank gets things wrong.
again, in the short term, I think the implication is if the US is going to have lower interest rates than perhaps it otherwise would have, that is going to tend to be negative for the dollar. Money tends to flow where interest rates are higher, so you will tend to see money leave the US, perhaps weaker dollar, and obviously that implies stronger rand for us and for other countries as well. So we've already seen the rand, trading around 17.30 at the moment. So we've already seen some of that benefit as US rate cuts are priced in. So the more the bias is towards cutting rates in the US, I think the more you could see support for the rand and for other currencies. That's in the short term. In the longer term, again, we're now moving into uncharted territory. It's difficult to say exactly how that would play out, but it could play out in a severe loss of confidence in the dollar and perhaps a much weaker dollar over time. So I think ultimately, it's the price of the dollar that's going to be that's going to carry the can here. If there's a substantial shift in the way that the Fed conducts monetary policy.
We've seen an interesting situation here where our bank is, for the moment at least, relatively speaking, more insulated from political interference, and yet could be accused of sort of going its own way because it's now targeting the lower end of the inflation target. So it's aiming for 3% rather than between 3 and 6%. Look, there's lots of politics and discussions and all sorts of messaging going on at the moment. Over time, is 3% the right target for South Africa? Izak, I realize it's a big question.
I think so. Very simply put, most of our peer group target 3%, countries like Brazil and so on. We sort of still stuck at a much higher inflation target of de facto 4.5%, but that target range obviously goes all the way up to 6%. And initially, for the first 20 or so years, everyone thought that the target was actually 6%. It wasn't 3 to 6%, it was 6. So I think 3 is an appropriate number for us. It's still higher than in developed countries where it's 2%, but it's in line with our peer group. And I think if you look at where inflation has been the last couple of months, it has been around 3%. So it is obviously something that we can achieve in South Africa, despite, fuel price volatility, food price volatility, Eskom tariffs. We can manage 3% inflation. Now it's just a case of saying, again, let's get that mindset going that inflation will be 3%, because ultimately if everybody believes that inflation is going to be 3%, their behavior moves in that direction. And that is ultimately the game that the central banks are trying to play, is just to get people to always have this number at the back of their heads, because their behavior will tend towards that number. If you are a business setting prices, or if you're negotiating a rental escalation or whatever, you will have that 3% number at the back of your mind, and that ultimately is how we get to 3% inflation over time.
Izak Odendaal, really appreciate the time this public holiday. Thank you. Investment strategist at Old Mutual, 24 minutes after 6.
7:02. Stephen is on the Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
Well, a recent announcement by the Home Affairs Minister, Leon Schreiber, that government is launching a new electronic travel authorization system. Essentially, someone here could get a visa electronically before they come to South Africa. And we could say goodbye to paper. Brett Tonge is the national chair of the hospitality organization FedHasa. Brett, good evening. I mean, this is kind of in line with what places like the US, the UK do. How important is this for the markets that we want to attract to come here?
Extremely important. Travel is you're sitting on your couch tonight and you're deciding to go on holiday. You're going to search for a place that's easy to travel to. Let's take Thailand or Vietnam. If you're going to go to Thailand tomorrow, well, you jump in an aircraft and you fly to Thailand. It's that simple. If you're going to go to Vietnam, you're going to have to go to the embassy in Pretoria. You're going to have to apply for a visa, and then you're going to travel. And you're going to have to, the destination has to be quite spectacular to be able to encourage you to go through that effort to travel. And that's no different to South Africa. Currently South Africa is an extremely difficult destination to travel to if you're from certain countries, India, China, just being an example. So anything that we can do as a country to ease the administrative burden on a traveler makes our country much more attractive as a destination.
It should also, over time, be cheaper for our government, right? I mean, it's a little bit of investment in IT, but over time, you would probably need fewer people to administer all of the paperwork because there's no paper to work on.
Very much so. At the moment, you've got officers at all the embassies to have to try and, process this paperwork, which you're 100% correct. Your cost to the company or country will be reduced dramatically. But for us as the travel industry, that isn't the important part. The important part is making travel to South Africa a easy, simple process. If we can achieve that, we'll see huge increases in the volumes. If you look at the volumes that let's say like Australia gets out of China, it's magnified by 10, 20 times what South Africa gets, if not more. But that's just because the administrative burden of traveling to Australia is so much less than traveling to South Africa if you're a Chinese traveler. And if you look right now, we're lagging far behind the world in terms of tourism growth. And a lot of it is to do with bureaucracy, basically. And if we can reduce that burden, we get the numbers.
Do you get a sense, Brett, I mean, for years everyone's talked about the potential for tourism in South Africa. We all understand it. But is there any kind of concerted national effort where everyone's united to try and sort this out? I thought for a time this is what might happen. But now we see, for example, Patricia de Lille, the tourism minister, firing the board of tourism SA. I mean, do things like that have an impact?
Oh, huge. Just for example, now we've got the Travel Indaba in Durban, which now Durban's just been awarded again. The planning for such travel exhibits is usually 2 years in advance. This needs to be worked on now for next year's Indaba in May, and we currently don't have a board. That's just one small microcosm. The knock-on effects of SA Tourism's board being fired like that it's immense. And right now South Africa is really on a recovery. We're recovering from 4 or 5 years of atrocious numbers, and any impediment such as this SA Tourism board firing is significant for the industry. You have to look, if you take the actual numbers, if you drill right down, South Africa only really gets around about just shy of 900,000 bona fide proper, as we'd expect, your traditional tourist that's going to go and stay in a game lodge or in a hotel and go to the V&A waterfront, or we only get around 900,000, which is shocking. If you take Phuket Island, which is probably the size of Durban municipality, gets, I think the last look I looked was about 3.7 million bona fide tourists a year. The number difference is just staggering.
All right, Brett Tunge, thanks very much indeed. The national chairperson of the hospitality organisation, FedHasa. Lots of work to do there. I mean, obviously, Ireland's closer to some bigger markets, etc. But even so, we're in the right time zone. There's plenty that we can do. I'm sure it doesn't help that Joburg is such a mess at the moment. But Cape Town, Kruger National Park, there are other places. Someone clever is going to work on quiet tourism in the Northern Cape. And, my view, someone else is going to make mountain biking with rhinoceroses, with, giraffes a thing at some point. You're with The Money Show, just gone 6:30.
702 with Stephen Grootes.
Email him on stephen@702.co.za.
Well, Chad, thank you so much for your Heritage Day message. He says, I didn't know giraffes could ride mountain bikes, so they wear helmets too. Very dangerous for a giraffe to ride a mountain bike without a helmet, Chad. I mean, all of that height. I mean, there could be serious drama. So, yes, of course they do. Rhinos, not so much. I mean, no one would notice if they didn't, and no one's going to tell them to wear their helmet if they choose not to. But I think you do understand what I was saying. I'm being slightly tongue-in-cheek. A couple of messages coming through on 072-702-1702. And we were talking a little bit about where are you the most productive I made the point I can hardly ever work at home. I find it just so frustrating. Now, I know plenty of people who actually really do prefer to go to, even a coffee shop or go into their office when they don't actually need to be there, on a weekend or early in the morning or late at night, something. Len says, I'm an academic. I'm always productive in my university space, library or syndicate room. I appreciate the Wi-Fi speed, the access to the cafeteria with varied healthy meals and drinks, and ease of entry and exit as well as parking. Thank you. Thanks, Len from Hyde Park. I think the other thing is you want to be in a place where everything is going to work. It's going to be quiet. It's going to be calm. You can sit down. Your device will be on. There'll be, that magic stuff called electricity. What's the holy trifecta? The three things that you need in South Africa that bring you happiness: water, electricity, and Wi-Fi. You got all three of those things working? Happiness. How often in your life do you get that? Well, where are you preferring to work nowadays? 011 883 0702 021 446 0567 and voice notes, okay, of course, on 072 702 1702.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
and DSTV channel 856.
Well, 16 minutes now to 7. We'll talk about your pension now. And it seems to me that I've been talking about the phrase, the two-pot pension system, for about the last decade, when actually it's only been implemented for a year. There was quite a long period in which we were talking about doing it, but it's only been going for quite a short time, and we've seen many people taking money out of the one pot. But on the other hand, they've kept most of their money in the system, and no one has left their job to try and get more money. But there's a lot of international experience around pensions, which may help us understand what the longer-term consequences are going to be. Mike Adsetts is the Global Chief Investment Officer at Momentum Investments. Mike, thank you for your time this Heritage Day. Good evening. Okay, a year in, what do we think we've learned so far about how people behave in the two-pot system? And I suppose I need to add to that what people do on year 5 might be very different to what they do on year 1.
Hi, Stephen. Thank you very much for having me on your show. I think a year into the system, we probably still have our training wheels on. So what have we seen thus far? Since the 1st of September last year, the total exits out of the pension system have been about 57 billion rand, and SARS has had a windfall of approximately 15 billion rand. So essentially, the tax rate that's been applied effectively on the two-pot system is 26%, which means that it's those income earners earning somewhere between 240 and 370,000 rand that have been accessing their savings. So it does seem to be accessed for emergency use. I mean, there's a high cost of access because it's a marginal tax rate. And what we've also seen from looking at our own data at Momentum is there seems to be a trend where individuals that have withdrawn from the two-pot system do it again. So there's a cohort. In total, there's been about 2.4 million withdrawals from the system, but there does seem to be a cohort of individuals who, from a necessity perspective, keep dipping back into the savings pot.
So the tension here is obvious, right? People need their money now, so there's a liquidity issue. And then people also need their money when they're older, right? So that it needs to be saved. Now, what the two-pot system tries to do is manage that tension and manage it in a way which says you can have access to a third of your money, but not all of it. Are there comparisons with other countries who've maybe managed that tension in a way that could sort of help us?
So I think, it's always it's a balancing act between meeting present needs, and there's you can see a consumer under distress means that there's a real present need, but essentially you bring in forward future consumption, which is essentially what your pension is doing, into current consumption, and that effectively means that you're going to have less in the future. If we look at different systems around the world, there tends to be a more focus on specific necessities to try and access the savings. So the general ones that allow access is for housing. The other one is medical expenses or disability. And then in a few systems in the US, there's things where there are hardship allowance. So the South African system tends to focus on a generic hardship allowance. What I don't think we've seen is what happens in the system when there's a real crisis event. So the access wasn't in COVID. I mean, we've got a consumer under distress, but what we don't yet know is how they behave in the future if we go through another pandemic. I mean, what we've seen effectively in systems around the world, that wealthier countries tend to do better than poorer countries, and we're in a middle-income country, so it really is striking a balancing act where, we've actually got to encourage people to only access that money in an emergency, because effectively you are spending future pensions.
As I listen to you answer that question, I'm sort of thinking about what would lead to a big change to the two-pot system. Now, as I understand it, the reason that this happened was there was pressure from unions and there was an understanding that people were actually leaving their job to access their pension because they needed it all now. And the sort of compromise was, well, we'll have a smaller one pot and a bigger second pot. Now, there may be moments of great financial crisis. The economy could continue to not grow, could even contract, which could lead to more pressure from unions and workers to say, well, actually, I need to be able to access more than I can now. Conversely, I suppose, and this is a much happier scenario, the economy could grow to the point where people need to draw less from their one pot. I kind of have a horrible feeling that actually we might be with the two-pot system as it is for quite a long time.
Yeah, Stephen, I think you've hit the nail on the head. If we don't have growth in the economy, consumers, individuals are going to be under distress. So I think it will be a continued space of contestation. The seeding amount for the two-pot system, when it was incepted in September last year, was the maximum of 10% of your savings, or 30,000, and now it's a third of future contributions. So I mean, realistically, it's not a significant amount of money. When I look at the numbers, approximately, if we're looking at a pension system in South Africa of 6 trillion rand, 57 billion is around 1%, slightly less than 1% of pension savings that have been accessed. So I concur with you. Absent significant growth in the economy, consumers will continue to be under stress, and there will be continued pressure to look at mechanisms to try and access what savings are left.
Where does all of this leave financial advisors? Because there is so much free financial advice. I put that in the biggest inverted commas I have to hand, Mike, on the internet all over the place. The world of investing for the future is getting more and more complicated. Does that mean that the role of a financial advisor becomes more important? Now, I suspect you're bound to say yes, but that doesn't mean it's free.
Yeah, so I think the first one is, access to the two-pot is at your marginal tax rate. So it's actually a very expensive mechanism of accessing money. So it can be, it's anything from 18 to 45% of any of the savings that you access are going to be taxed depending on your income levels. So I think the role of the financial advisor is really going to be to say, what are the alternatives? And ultimately, the intent with the two-pot, as you said earlier, was emergency access, to stop individuals from becoming desperate and exiting out of the system. So with all the tax consequences, the difference between tax rates currently in employment and at retirement, it could be a very costly mechanism to access your pension fund. So in this case, I do think that financial advice is warranted. But as you say, financial advice does come at a price. So I think, fortunately, there are retirement benefit counselors often associated with pension funds. So if you approach your corporate pension fund where you're accessing, there should be more cost-effective mechanisms to get advice, if you cannot afford a financial advisor in your own right.
Mike Adsetts, thanks very much indeed. Global Chief Investment Officer at Momentum Investments on your Heritage Day Money Show, 7 minutes to 7.
The Money Show, Stephen Grootes, is brought to you by Adsetts CIB, banking on local growth with Club Med South Africa to bring the first resort of its kind to the country.
Well, some reporting from Bloomberg over the last few days that Taiwan has said it's imposing restrictions on the exports of particular microchips to South Africa. So Taiwan's trade regulator saying they will now require pre-approval before manufacturers can sell these chips to South Africa. Now, it follows after our government downgraded Taiwan's office here, forcing Taipei to move their office from Tshwane or Pretoria to Joburg. Jan Vermeulen is the editor at My Broadband. Jan, good evening. I mean, Taiwan says it's taking the step over national security concerns, and I made the point earlier. Look at a map. We're halfway around the world from Taiwan. There's no national security concern here, is there?
Probably not. The way they probably arrived at that kind of argument or that kind of statement is to pretty much climb on the same kind of argument as the United States, which is to talk about South Africa's cozying up to China and Iran and that sort of stuff, and so justifying it that way. But previously they did say that they were considering countermeasures. I think that's maybe just the way that the Chinese was translated, but countermeasures in response to the diplomatic situation where we are downgrading their de facto embassy in South Africa from, it was called a liaison office. It's now going to be called a commercial office, and obviously kicking them out of the capital city and moving them to Johannesburg.
How many companies in South Africa are using the sort of class of microchip that's affected by this? I imagine it's not a huge number.
That depends on how exactly this plays out. So even if it's not the worst case scenario, it is still pretty bad because it impacts our automotive sector. So our automotive sector directly imports chips from places like Taiwan. And to put this in perspective, right, so there's a couple of people, when people think about chip manufacturing, they might think of a couple of countries, China, Taiwan, and South Korea come to mind, and then some other chip fabs around the world. But if you're talking about the most advanced chips in the world, Taiwan essentially has a monopoly on the space. They control 90% of the sector there. When you look at, cheaper, less powerful chips, then, you're looking at 50 to 70% market share, depending on whose estimate you go with. So having Taiwan sanction you in this respect is very bad. It's going to impact one of our major employers in the country, which is the automotive manufacturing sector. And if it is the worst case scenario, so in other words, if Taiwan is going to go to Intel, Nvidia, AMD, and Apple and say, you now need to come to us to get pre-approval, and you need to tell your device partner. So Apple deals directly, so Apple would do directly. But NVIDIA, AMD, and Intel, might have to go to Lenovo, HP, and Dell and say, before you are allowed to bring anything into South Africa, you need to get clearance from Taiwan, please. And if that happens, then we're talking about impact everything from hearing aids to television sets.
Sure. I hadn't thought the consequences through in that way. This really is another example of how important microchips have become as a weapon. I mean, for Taiwan, this then, in that scenario, could have a very real impact on us and would be a very clever way for them to respond, to use that weapon against our government after its decision.
Yeah, this is kind of their queen. And so you don't bring your queen out early in a chess game. But this is like their big gun. They call it Taiwan Silicon Shield against China. It's essentially part of the geopolitical reason countries like the United States will help defend Taiwan if China were ever to attack it. It's because of how extremely essential Taiwan is in the global semiconductor and high technology industry. And so, this is Taiwan's big way to try and force a negotiation about something it feels strongly about. And it's interesting that it feels strongly enough about South Africa to say, we'll bring out our queen and we will put you in check. So let's see what happens.
I mean, as so often in these cases, it's not just about South Africa. It's sending a signal to other countries too. We have a weapon and we're not afraid to use it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there might be other geopolitical things at play here. There might be all kinds of things that we don't know. But certainly the United States has also expressed irritation at South Africa picking Taiwan out of Pretoria.
Jan Vermeulen, thanks very much indeed. Really appreciate the time. Editor at mybroadband.co.za. And of course, I'm reminded that the Chinese ambassador to South Africa yesterday was talking up Chinese investment here. So things go in lots of directions on this. We'll talk about the future of AI in just a moment. I mean, lots of suggestions that AI may not be as important as we thought it would be. Wendy Nola will update you on the car market. And don't forget, Professor Kechle Ndlovu, the Vice-Chancellor at the Vaal University of Technology. Looking forward to him as your shapeshifter this evening. With The Money Show, it's Heritage Day at 7 o'clock.
And now, The Money Show.
With Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Adsetts CIB, banking on local growth with Club Med South Africa to bring the first resort of its kind to the country. Well, plenty to come in the second hour of our Heritage Day show. We'll be talking about artificial intelligence. It does seem to me that there's been a bit of a change in, tone in AI and how we sense it's going to change the world. I mean, there was a time a couple of months ago when that's all anyone ever talked about and how different it was going to be and how you had to get behind the winning model. Now it seems to be slightly different. We'll talk about that. Wendy Nola has been looking at the auto industry and how it's changing and what that means for consumers. She's your consumer ninja. And then don't forget, of course, your shapeshifter this evening, Professor Kechle Ndlovu, the Vice-Chancellor and Principal at Venda University of Technology. Looking forward to that conversation as your shapeshifter this evening. 7 minutes after 7.
The Money Show.
With Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
And DSTV channel 856.
So we're used to a little bit of fun and games, or even snot and trana this Heritage Day, to talk at the United Nations General Assembly in New York. You've got so many world leaders together, certain things happen. There were some astonishing things yesterday. It wasn't just that President Trump gave a very long speech. It wasn't the longest that's ever been given. He might well have felt that he had the right to do it. It wasn't that the escalator seemed to stop working, or he said that his auto cue wasn't working. Both of those things we understand were controlled on the American side, not the UN side. Seemed to be very, very strange. But by far for me, the strangest thing I think I've ever seen coming out of a United Nations General Assembly meeting is the video of the French President Emmanuel Macron. So he's in a car. He's the French president. He wants to cross a particular intersection to go to his hotel or wherever he needs to go. The road is blocked. There's no one on it, but it's blocked by the police because Donald Trump is supposed to come past there. But nothing's happened for half an hour. Macron, I don't know if you know them, he's a young, vigorous man. He gets out of his car and he goes to talk to the police officer. This is the president of France talking to a New York police officer, saying, what's going on? And I'm paraphrasing here. And he's told, no, well, it's Trump, and he's been waiting long enough. So Macron picks up his cell phone, and who does he call? Well, obviously the president of the United States, and he phones Trump. And he says to Trump, what's going on? And nothing happened with the highway, so then Macron seems crossed the road, walked across it. This is the president of France, by the way. And continued the conversation, did a couple of selfies, shook a few hands, and wandered through the streets of New York. And I have a few things going on in my head here. It reminded me a little bit of President Ramaphosa's walks, not a bad thing to do. I've seen video of him actually crossing a road on Jan Smuts Drive in Joburg. You know, it was a TikTok video, and clearly he has a morning walk there, here, there, and various other places. No surprises in some ways. It did make me wonder, though. A lot of the leaders at the General Assembly, Macron's one of them, Ramaphosa is another, there are plenty of other people, are likely at some point to host Trump. And they're under pressure from their constituencies to show that they can stand up to Trump. Now, Trump has treated Macron like this in New York. What do you think is going to happen when Trump goes to Paris? By which I mean Paris. Not Paris, Paris. Do you think he's going to forget it? That seems unlikely to me. Do you think the French police might need to block a highway at some point? Could something happen? I mean, there's a famous story, which I think might have been inadvertently confirmed on the Money Show when we were speaking to a pilot, that when the George W. Bush sort of Air Force One came into South African airspace, they said, "Hello, this is Air Force One," and they said, and Pretoria's response was, "No, your call sign is whatever it is. You're not Air Force One here, but Air Force One is something else." I'm just reminded of that story a little bit.
The Money Show.
Business Unusual.
So I don't know if you've noticed this, but a bit of a change in tone in the language that people are using about AI. So a few months ago, it was one model to rule the world, get behind the model. Now, I see more and more articles wondering, is there too much money invested in AI? Suggestions that maybe it won't make as big a difference as we previously thought. Richard Mulholland is one of the people who spends a lot of time thinking about this. He's the founder of the AI agency Too Many Robots and the author of Relentless Relevance. Richard, good evening. It's not just me, is it? I mean, do you see this change in language?
There's been a lot of this happening of late with it feels like to some degree an emotional corner is being turned. I think what's happening is we're getting out of the novelty cycle and into the utility cycle. And that always does cause it kind of moves from the heart to the head. And when you move from the heart to the head, you start looking at previous emotional decisions through logical lenses, and things change a bit.
So, I mean, okay, this would be a natural part of the program, but is it also moving away from the thought that AI is going to, or one version of it, you know, Grok or OpenAI or something else is going to, or ChatGPT is going to rule the world? Instead, I get a sense that there's less of a focus on one model and more of a kind of interest in a kind of more diffused focus or more diffused picture, rather, of people looking at different parts of AI that will do certain things for them. And so the idea of a kind of dominance, which I think brings a lot of emotions of fear, that dominance is falling away?
To some degree. There will always be a race in these tools because a lot of the underlying technologies that the narrow intelligences that you're discussing, the boring stuff, the utility stuff, is still powered by these same juggernauts. And this is where some of the financial mindset stuff has been changing. And you know, the rumors of a bubble bursting have been coming in. But I absolutely think that it's a good thing from when the technology gets into the utility phase. Yes, it sounds like the excitement is changing, but actually it's finding its rhythm, you know, so it's finding its high utility, boring function. And that's a good thing. When, yes, it's no longer creating videos and things, and that's not all the hype cycle. But now what it's doing is it's, consolidating all the data in a large corporation, making it significantly better, or connecting multiple systems across large factories, dropping prices for consumers everywhere. That utility, while not as sexy, is definitely of more value in the long term. And it's where the smart money will go.
It's also not as visible, right? Yes, it's happening, and I kind of know it's happening around me, but it's not quite as visible. And I don't know if that matters. Maybe, you know, as you say, because it's sort of less interesting, so it's more boring. But that also then means that the way we feel about it changes because it's just not as visible.
Yes, but I think alongside all of these changes that happen below the hood, there will always be the ones that happen above it. So recent releases of things like Nano Banana, I'm not sure if you've spoken about that on the show yet, that's really, really changed the game with regards to image generation and persistent image generation. That's got high excitement in the space, and that's a very consumer level excitement. It'll have impact to graphic designers and creative individuals as well, but for the most part, it's democratized creativity for the rest of us, which you could argue is a greater good. And so I think there will always be, for the foreseeable future, there will be a lot of exciting things happening for us to still see high novelty in.
Is it possible to know what the next phase is after this then?
Right, so let's go to the bubble a bit. Let's imagine, let's hypothesize this for a second. Let's say what people are predicting about the AI bubble bursting. There's a lot of chat around that, and a lot of people are upset or believe that this means that AI itself is bursting. But of course, that's not the case. What's happening is the financial overexcitement is regulating itself. Now, one of the upsides of this is right now there is an incredible amount of capital gravity going to AI-based businesses. You know, like 7 out of every 10 investment dollars is going to AI at the moment. And, out of those $7, 4 of them are going into data centers, of which 3 of those are going into GPUs like NVIDIA. So we have a very, very small group that has a massive amount of gravity for all the capital that's happening. And although this is very exciting for a big, growing market, there is a negative part of that happens to all other industries where that money is flowing from. And so one of the upsides of maybe, let's not say the bubble bursting, but the balloon deflating, is that capital will have to be reallocated back to other industries. And I think this is one of the very, very positive outcomes, is that AI will right size its excitement. It'll get to the level of which it is the correct, value market fit for what it should be, and that will allow the surplus capital to go back into other supporting industries. So I think there's actually a massive upside to this calming.
Richard Mulholland, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Founder of the AI agency Too Many Robots on Business Unusual tonight.
The Money Show.
Consumer Ninja.
Well, your consumer ninja, Wendy Nola, is one of those people who often gets complaints and concerns around cars, and particularly paying back cars. You can understand why, but a lot of it is also about certain trends that we're seeing. So there seems to be an increase, for example, in balloon payments in the car industry. Wendy Nola, good evening. You were at an event. It was a convention of dealers. Was it really called DealerCon? Really?
It really was. I think it's a bit unfortunate, but it didn't seem to occur to too many other people because I suppose they deal with as many cons as I do in the course of their work. So DealerCon, short for Dealer Conference. It was hosted at the Sandton Convention Centre. It was an all-day event, a huge event, and hugely insightful to me because in the room and up on the stage were representatives of all the large dealership companies, the banks that finance these cars, the big OEMs or car manufacturers, as most people call them, NAMSA, which represents the OEMs, the RMI. They were all there. I took loads and loads of notes all day, and then later I took a very deep dive into Cars.coza. They hosted this event, I should have said. Cars.coza hosted it, and they released their industry report 2025, looking at what's happening now compared to 10 years ago, which was also full of gems.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the big changes, if you had to ask me, what do I see on the roads driving around, say, Sandton, right? Aspiration. I don't see nearly as many German sedans. I don't see your BMWs and your Mercedes-Benz in the way that I used to. What I do see is big buckies.
Yeah, and the data bears that out, Stephen. So the double cab bakkie has replaced the German premium sedan as the desired status symbol for South African motorists, especially in the price bracket of 500K to 1 million. So we're talking, Toyota Hilux, Ford Ranger, Isuzu D-Max. They are the IT vehicles at the moment, yeah. So the other big thing, of course, the other big change, particularly in the last 10 years, which is the span we're looking at, is that the Chinese have entered the market, and they've also entered the lucrative bakkie market, which is challenging the legacy brands because there are now 14 of these bakkies on the local market. Interestingly, Lebo Rakakola, sales department executive at Isuzu, said the past 2 years have been really challenging with new entrants coming in with competitive pricing. She said, but we compete with a core value of the brand: durability, reliability, fuel efficiency, especially when it comes to the fleet. She says everyone comes in with the bells and whistles, but if you look at what the core need is, it's for workhorses, and the new entrants are going for the lifestyle market. So you can see the line being drawn between the two segments there. Yeah.
I wonder if those 14 bakkies includes the Hilux.
Perhaps just.
What's happening with SUVs? Because that's changed as well dramatically.
Okay, so yes, compared with share of stock on Cars.coza in 2015 and now 10 years later, SUVs and crossovers have grown their presence by more than 100%.
Wow.
While the big drop-off has been with sedans. They've dropped by 60%. So, I mean, I suppose they're biggest when it comes to the Uber or the e-hailing market. But for ordinary car drivers like you and me, not flavor of the month and haven't been for a very long time. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Who is buying cars, Wendy? Because, I mean, that's one of the interesting things. Are you seeing any changes with older people, younger people, people in the mid-range?
The youth market is huge, which is quite interesting when you think about the level of unemployment. And we're talking 18 to 25-year-olds. The proportion of 18 to 25-year-olds who are financing vehicles in the 250,000 to 500,000 range has surged by more than 100%.
Wow, so it's
in
doubled.
recent years. Yeah, doubled. Now representing more than half of finance agreements in the segment. So, and they are most influenced by reels on TikTok and Instagram. And they prefer new cars, which I think is alarming when you consider how much more expensive they are, you know, relative to income than they were 10 years ago. So that's quite a story, that.
Very interesting number. The cheapest car, I mean, I've always said that often in South Africa, the cheapest car is also the most popular car. I don't know if that's true anymore. I think there has been a difference. What have you found?
No. Okay, so the sort of the two cheapest cars on the market are the Suzuki Espresso and the Toyota Vitz. They both sell for around 179,000 Rand. And they cost twice as much as the cheapest new car did in 2015, which was the Chery QQ3, adjusted for inflation. So it's no wonder that Westbank's data is revealing a significant increase, as you said at the beginning, in the use of balloon payment options for car finance. So, yeah, the percentage of new finance deals, including a balloon payment, rose from 27% in July to 35% last year.
Wow.
And the amount that they carve away to worry about later is also going up. In August was for Westbank, we're talking about here, was 37%. That's a lot of money to worry about later.
That's nearly 40% of car finance agreements now have a balloon payment. That's astonishing.
Yeah. And that's because people can't really afford new cars anymore, and they should be looking at used cars rather.
Yeah.
But this is the reality of what's happening.
And overall sales, so I mean, I do remember during COVID there was a massive drop. How have things sort of compared over the last 10 years? Has it evened out?
This is so interesting, and I hadn't realized this until I was at the conference. So passenger sales were sitting at 412,000 units in 2015. And in 2020, that fell off a cliff to 246,500. Obviously, largely due to the disruptive impact of the pandemic. So volumes have partly recovered, and I thought they would have gone back to or exceeded what they were sitting at, 10 years ago. But, 412,000 units, 2015, currently stabilizing at 350,000 units, more or less, since in the last 3 years. So the market has not regained its mid-2010s strength, and I hadn't realized that until as I said, until I heard the figures at the conference.
Yeah, economic growth in cars is such an interesting correlation, I suspect.
Exactly.
We've been talking about, the last 10 years. Okay, so the big disruption, is it the Chinese brands?
It is, for sure. So, we're coming off a low base, but 2015 Chinese vehicles accounted for 0.76% of the stock on cars.co.za. Now that figure is 6.45%, which is a growth of, silly numbers, 748%. But looking more recently, the impact in the space of 2.5 years, traditional market leaders Toyota and Volkswagen have shared 10% and 17% of share respectively. So those, you can start seeing the impact there. Most of the so-called legacy brands have lost market share. Nissan has shared a massive 51%, Renault 40%, Mercedes-Benz 31%. The only traditional brands that have grown their market share recently, since the big influx of the Chinese brands, are Hyundai, 6% up, Ford, 2%, Isuzu, 3%, and BMW, 3%. And of the non-Chinese brands, Suzuki and Mahindra have emerged as the strongest performance in recent years, growing market share in the last 2 years by 31% and 52% in the case of Mahindra.
And
So,
I think we're only just beginning here, because if you look at Chinese electric car capacity, they're not even using half of it. And there is such an intense price war with electric vehicles in China at the moment that some of them are going to end up here. And there was actually an agreement with Eskom about that for one of the Seagull brands quite recently. So I think this process is just beginning.
Yeah, it's just beginning. We're not seeing for electric cars. South Africa is not a big story at all at the moment. You're looking at hybrids, yes, more of a story. It was interesting, show of hands, in the audience, who thinks electric cars are the way of the future in South Africa? Spattering of hands. Hybrids, plug-in hybrids, yes, a whole lot of hands went up. So that's what sort of the scenario looks like now for South Africa at the moment. But these things can change very quickly.
Yeah, I know. Well, they can. I mean, look at how Chinese cars have changed the game. Financing cars, how has that changed? The sort of maths of it all?
Okay, so I found this interesting in a sort of depressing way. A minimum salary of 21,900, so let's call it 22,000, would be needed to finance those cheapest new cars, Stephen, the ones just under 180,000.
Yeah.
That's working on a 10% deposit over 72 months, that's 6 years, at 13.75% interest rate, if 15% of that net salary is set aside for a car. The average net salary in South Africa is around 18,000. So, we're looking at needing nearly 22,000. So it's obvious that, why we're seeing these long payment plans with step payments and balloons and the rest. I found this also interesting. Cars.co has sampled 100 leads, and they worked out that 52% of their customers ended up buying a car more expensive one that they sent the lead for. So they put their price range at whatever and ended up committing to 52% more. I think that was really enlightening for me. Westbank says 7 out of 10 clients are declined. That's a lot. Sure. And only 20% of cars are paid for in cash in this country. 80% of them were financed. So of those 80%, there were a lot that weren't financed because they just didn't meet the affordability criteria.
And 20% of those will be funded out of someone's bond, I'm sure. So they're financed in a different way.
Yeah, and also drawing down from the two-pot thing for retirement.
Yes.
That apparently is having a big impact, which is also a little bit depressing.
Wendy Nola, so much to talk about. Thank you so much. You were at DealerCon.
I was.
Conference where some of those insights came from. Wendy Nola, your consumer ninja. Thank you.
The Money Show.
Shapeshifters.
23 minutes now to 8 the time. Time for your Shapeshifter conversation this Heritage Day Wednesday. There are quite a few jobs in South Africa that are very tough for a long time. You would have heard people say, including me, the hardest job in South Africa is running Eskom. I think it's still hard, but it's slightly easier than it was. I think being the National Police Commissioner is probably not an easy job. Being president, perhaps. But there's another category of job that I think has actually become more and more difficult, and that's running a high education institution. There are a lot of reasons for that. The challenges of our society can come together in these institutions. So it's a great pleasure to welcome Professor Kekhle Ndlovu, the Vice Chancellor and Principal at the Vaal University of Technology, as your shapeshifter this evening. Prof, thanks for joining us and good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Grootes and your viewers.
If you call me Stephen, can I call you Kekhle?
That's good. That's fine.
Okay. I mean, it's a public holiday after all.
Well, I'm also Stephen, by the way.
I know.
Stephen.
I know. But then we're even and then it gets messy. I was looking around online for your personal history, and I could see that you first started studying at the University of Zululand. So this was in the 1980s, and you were studying to be a teacher. And I was wondering how you got there, because I know from that time, life was pretty tough for most people in the country, and particularly in that area. So I was wondering what sort of community you came from, and if you were studying in the community that you came from, in fact.
Well, I come from Newcastle, which is at that time mostly mines. I think Kilbach and Bellengage were the most biggest mines that were there. Tannhauser, of course, but we're from Newcastle, mostly a rural area, not much to go by, and a school not being one of those favorite things. But at the same time, I think we were kids who looked up to our brothers and sisters who used to, on weekends, come out, looking great and all that kind of thing. So one had to think in terms of saying, hey, how do you get to university? And of course, what helped me was also to move away from Newcastle to a township called Mpumalanga in Hammersdale, where I think mostly that's where the thinking about university, because at the time in Belengi, the issue of university, even at Matadeni University, was something far-fetched, basically. And most teachers we had were coming from colleges. So there were very few teachers who came from university. Only in Mpumalanga, Sibus is a high school where I saw. And going to university, I remember we used to get short-term employment when schools are closed. And at the time when I got my results in December of 1983, and my father asking, so what could I do now? I said, well, I don't know, but I've applied to nursing, I've applied to university and so on. And he said, well, we don't have money to take you to university. So I said, no, don't worry. If I'm lucky, I'll find bursaries. But unfortunately, I didn't. But one of the principals of Sbugo Sezwe, on hearing that I was accepted, he said, well, I would assist partly. What do you have? And I said, I've got enough money to register for a first semester. I said, okay, fine. The rest you'll then see how best you use it for accommodation and all those things. So that's how I went to university.
Sure.
That's my starting point. And in my thinking, because I did biology and mathematics, I didn't know that then you required physics to become a doctor. And so in my mind, I was like, yeah, I'm going to go to university and be a doctor. But then I didn't meet the requirements for a doctor. Then I opted for teaching. But unfortunately, I didn't teach, at the end of the day. So while at university, my father, because he worked for the mine under JCI, Johannesburg Joint Consolidated Industries, and the Chamber of Mines had a scholarship program for kids whose parents worked for the mine. So in my second year, I had applied for it and I got that. And so that actually helped me through my entire years at the university.
Sure.
And I remember when I had completed my undergraduate, I just decided that, no, I need to continue to do honors. So I wrote them a letter asking, can you fund me for honors? They said, no, we don't fund honors. We only fund undergraduate. I said, okay. So while I was accepting that, they said, well, sometimes we have a lot of money that is not used at the end of the year after allocating everybody. So if there is money remaining, we will then consider you. So that's how I went for my honors.
It's quite a story, Kekla, because it sort of explains how on one way there's sort of an element of luck to it. But people also clearly seeing some potential there and thinking we're going to fund this. And you clearly deciding as quite a young man, if I may say, from sort of after 1990 to study a master's and then a doctorate. You were at UKZN by then. You clearly decided education was your thing.
Well, maybe the question is how, when we set, I think the first week with the dean it was Professor Lutuli then at the University of Zululand. He asked us a question: why are we here for honors? So we said, we want to make money. Those days there used to be something called M+1, +2, +3, +4, +5, and with an honors you could be M+5. So which means if I completed my honors and go to teach, I would have been one of the highly paid teachers because of M+5. So he said, no, you guys are here to waste our time. Actually, you shouldn't be here if that was your reasoning. So we said, but then what do you think we should be here for? And he said, at honors, they prepare academics. That's how he put it. Says, you are here because we want you to be academics. And then after your honors, you're going to do masters, which is we classify as practice ground to determine the extent to which you are ready for PhD. And then, of course, PhD, you must demonstrate the extent to which you can generate new knowledge and therefore become an academic, you know. And we said, yeah, but said, look around, check what you were studying and tell me if that will help you in any way in a high school. And there was nothing. Because it was all philosophy and planning and, you know, high level kind of stuff. That had nothing to do with the school per se, you know. And that sort of changed my mind in terms of saying, well, maybe there's a reason why I came back and maybe let me take this line to out. I remember going to UKZN, it was University of Natal then, and then to register for masters. And the professor, the professor, said to me, "Oh, you already prepared your proposal?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's what we're taught to do. That when you apply for masters, you must demonstrate that you know how to write the proposals." And he said, "But what's your issue?" He says, "Well, at that time, they taught their prospective master students how to write at that level. So first you must undergo this process before you can even start, you know." So, and it became easy for me because then actually the master's was completed within the 2-year period, but it was a technicality kind of, in a sense that the year I went for registration, they said I mustn't register, but I must continue working till the following year, you know. And then the following year, by the time I registered, it was way ahead.
Okay, so I need to rush along a little bit because there's so much of your career that I want to get to. In the late 2000s, you worked for USAID. You were working in Africa, but for USAID. And I was wondering how you feel about the fact that, you know, all of those programs have been shut down now. That must have been quite painful for you to hear.
Having worked for USAID and not just in South Africa in terms of the programs we were running for the higher education sector, but also I was responsible for, during my time, for Bill Clinton's Education for Democracy initiative, which was more so the Southern African side of it. And so if you have been there and see the value of the US government support, be it in education, in agriculture, in economic development, you know, and lately in health, especially issues around HIV/AIDS. And of course, the people who drive these programs, the dedication that they have, and then all of a sudden, it just falls apart like nothing happened. You know, I was like taken aback a bit in terms of saying, look, I'm not sure whether Trump understands the value of a foreign assistance development in particular. That's how it's called, and how far it goes. I mean, there are many South Africans who, during my time, that we funded to go and study in the US, masters, PhDs. Some of them are actually commentators, political commentators. I
know.
You know. So that kind of support and development. When I was in Malawi, we ran a very funny program from where I come from. I come from higher education, but then I was asked to run a basic education program. And the reason for that was that we always had this argument about whether higher education is a private benefit or public good, you know. And our argument is that higher education, or people who qualified for higher education, have a significant contribution in the public fiscus. Therefore, we need to support higher education at all times. And by the way, for you to have a strong basic education, You need people trained in higher education. You need policymakers, you need planners, so there's no way that you could say you are supporting basic education without supporting higher education. So that program was designed around having that kind of demonstration to two institutions, was USAID and the World Bank.
We're speaking to Professor Kekle Ndlovu, the Vice-Chancellor and Principal at the Vaal University of Technology, your shapeshifter tonight. In a moment, we'll talk about some of the things that have happened at our institutions and how he'll protect VUT from corruption. That's next, 10 minutes to 8.
The Money Show, Stephen Grootes, is brought to you by Absa CIB, banking on local growth with Club Med South Africa to bring the first resort of its kind to the country.
The Money Show.
Shapeshifters.
Professor Kekle Ndlovu, the Vice-Chancellor and Principal at the Vaal University of Technology, your shapeshifter this evening. Prof, when you consider the issues that arise when you're running a VUT, the Vaal University of Technology, I made the point deliberately at the start of this that higher education institutions are difficult to run, and I'm sure you've come across that.
Yes, they are difficult to run. One, we are there to provide opportunities for learners coming out of high school, and yet we have limited space for them. So, beginning of the year, that becomes the biggest headache for all of us, because you have those that have applied, those that have not applied, those that because they have passed matric and they deserve an opportunity, and you must give them the opportunity. So it becomes a major challenge, but also some people taking advantage of those activities in a very nefarious ways. So that's the one, but also challenges where you can think of student politics to the extent possible that on its own, it's also something that needs to be looked after very much so in the context of how do you, because remember, student politics in our universities also operates along the political line. So we've got your Youth League, ANC Youth League, SASCO, Student Organization, EFF, and so on and so on. So those politics are crucial, especially when they get to a point where the SRCs are constituted in a manner that creates an imbalance, where one party does not necessarily outright win, so it becomes a bit of a challenge balancing two opposing parties of views. And of course, financial challenges around sustainability, because one, we have responsibilities to run the university. We also students on the one hand who say, well, this is too expensive for us. Our parents can't afford, but they still want to come for education. So how do we find resources to make sure that we're able to run? Because we depend on, two basic incomes. One is the subsidy from government and the other is student fees.
Yeah.
And currently, there is a struggle around that as to whether government needs to regulate the fees or remain as is, where our councils are the ones that make determination of fees.
Yeah.
So there is, but also staffing challenges.
Sure.
Like, I'll give you an example of in my case. How do I attract? If you look at the history of VUT from where it was and where it is today, it becomes very, very difficult to attract staff to come to the university because they're thinking of the history. They're thinking whether, do I go there? We had a problem where our salaries were way, way, way behind compared to the sector.
Sure.
And whenever even people say, I want to come, and you tell them that this is the salary you're going to get, and then they say, no, we're wasting my time.
Sure. I wonder.
There are many challenges.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you've read Jonathan Janssen's book, Corrupted. When I was reading it, I kept saying, wow, because of the examples of corruption were just so amazing, you had vice chancellors with private lifts and guns and boots. It was just amazing. My wife kept saying, are you okay? Because I was like, wow. Do you think it's possible to protect VUT from that kind of corruption? I'm talking about, in a sustainable basis after you leave. Is there a structural way to protect higher education institutions from that kind of stuff that Jansen talks about?
Sure. Stephen, I'm not sure a structural way, but I think we have to work towards ensuring that we appoint people who are committed to the institution and to their pockets. I think that's, I don't know how we do that, but that's one of the critical things. We have currently the SIU operating at VUT, taking into account of the issues that happened in the past. And we hope that that could become a factor in terms of people thinking, if I want to do this, then there's a likelihood that I'm going to get caught at some point, because if they say you can do the investigations, so it helps us to create that kind of environment. But also within the context of whether other people currently take heed of that, or undercurrent somehow things happen that we have to find out. But we have to put systems in place that ensures that we're able to guard against. So controls and all those things are not sufficient, because it also has to do with attitude. There's a book by this man, Aikwe Ama. I don't know whether you're familiar with that book.
I'm not.
Which says the beautiful ones are not yet born. He's a Ghanaian. It was out in the 1960s, I think, 1968, if I'm not mistaken. And the whole idea of the book is all about, because it explores the themes of corruption, disillusionment, and of course, during that time, the struggle for integrity in post-independence Africa. But this phrase, the beautiful ones are not yet born, has now aggravated to a metaphorical expression where people feel the hope for future generations, longing for visionary leadership, or sometimes what they call the idea that true greatness is yet to emerge.
Not yet Uhuru is another way of putting it.
Kind of. I mean, this is a problem we're having today, actually. And I'm saying this because I know that kind of reflection of what is happening outside could and may happen at the university, no matter how much effort we put in to close the gaps. Somebody's going to try and always find a way how to crack the system,
Professor,
and so on. So
I'm very sorry. We do have to leave it there, unfortunately. We're out of time. Professor Kekle and Ndlovu, thank you so much. I really appreciate the time. The Vice-Chancellor and Principal at the Vaal University of Technology, your Heritage Day shapeshifter.
The Money Show, Stephen Grootes, is brought to you by ABSA CIB, banking on local growth with Club Med South Africa to bring the first resort of its kind to the country.
Quick look at your markets in the US. The Dow Jones down 0.25%, the Nasdaq down 0.33%, the S&P 500 down 0.26%. Plenty to come, of course. Aubrey is up next. We'll chat tomorrow. Good evening. It's 8 o'clock.